Good afternoon. My name is Nico Klerk. I'm a postdoc researcher at Utrecht University, where I work on the project Projecting Knowledge, the Magic Lantern as a tool for mediating science communication in the Netherlands, 1880-1940. I will speak for a while about lantern readings. For those of you unfamiliar with these objects, a series of images will slowly guide you through a compilation of these objects and show you what kinds of information they may contain. Lantern readings, in French notes explicatives, are pre-printed or type-scripted brochures that were meant to support non-professional lantern lecturers in their performance. They could be rented by anyone wanting to enter the business of the lantern show. Lantern readings contain more or less continuous explanatory texts to a fixed series of slides. In line with the research project Projecting Knowledge, I will restrict this topic to educational readings of general interest. There are few repositories where a significant number of these objects have been stored and/or digitized. The British Magic Lantern Society, the Musée National de l'Éducation in Rouen, and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris. But overall, their survival rate appears to be lower than that of lantern slides. However, not all these readings are the same. While some consisted of a narrative or a series of self-contained descriptions, other ones merely provided skeleton information that a prospective lecturer was expected to route out with information found elsewhere. But even when a brochure's text seems complete enough to be used as a narration to a series of slides, from an interactive point of view, they are still manifestly incomplete. Despite these texts' creation of coherence and continuity in print, they would have been insufficient in performance. One of the fundamentals that I presume, therefore, is that their success also critically rested on a simultaneous mutual acknowledgement of lecturer and audience. This means that ritual, in an interactive sociological sense, came into play. My notion of ritual is borrowed from the work of sociologist Erving Goffman. In his view, ritual identifies a moment whenever two or more people are aware of each other's presence and share a focus of attention, during which time mutual respect is expected in order to get the course of action of everyone involved done without trouble. Thus, ritual occurs as much in fleeting situations, such as passing each other on the street, as in prolonged or involved situations, such as delivering and attending a lecture. Admittedly, Goffman's work was based on non-systematic, observed, face-to-face social situations at best, supplemented by examples taken from a variety of published sources, such as newspapers, memoirs, novels, feature films, etc. Nonetheless, his uniquely perceptive observations of everyday interactive events warrant their use as a point of orientation. It should be borne in mind, though, that his examples would not always have withstood data from recorded instances of face-to-face situations. Basically, his notion of ritual deals with respect and trust as ways of making social life possible. In this view, a lecture, for instance, is a reciprocal arrangement that assumes distinct obligations. One party is expected to speak in a certain way at a scheduled length, while the other is to meanwhile listen and give more or less narrowly prescribed forms of feedback, such as applause or questions afterwards. But for these parties to become what Goffman calls ratified participants in the event, mutual acknowledgement is not merely presupposed, as, for instance, in mainstream stage plays, although ostensibly denied by the actors during performance, Rather, it needs to be demonstrated during each performance, because lectures, unlike plays, are non-character platform presentations. That is to say, whereas actors stage a fictional world before spectators in the real one, lecturer and audience operate in the same realm of everyday reality of trust and respect. Therefore, lecturers who rigidly stick to their prepared text and show no acknowledgement of their audience risk the latter's loss of interest or even approval. And that is the reason why these brochures feel and are incomplete. Being pre-printed, they could be rented by any lecturer who was not only expected to master its topic, but also its performance. And while some companies sometimes provided so-called preliminary hints to improve their performance, when it came to ritual work to establish a rapport with their audiences, these so-called amateur lecturers largely had to improvise. As a matter of fact, the educational lecture in particular would have allowed more room for ritual work than other Lenten genres. At first sight, their printed texts often began and ended as abruptly as those for these other genres, such as fairy tales, sermons, poems, and other literary texts. But during their performance, the possibilities for spoken demonstrations of audience acknowledgement were limited, the result of their often highly dialogic character, the compelling expectations created by meter and rhyme scheme, and/or their familiarity. Their recital rather resembled a set piece, the ritually interactive aspects of which were necessarily accomplished by dramatics. Dramatics, acting out, was, of course, considered the preserve of the professional lecturers, and this distinctive aspect of their trade was seized upon in pamphlets or in letters to the editors of trade journals to heap scorn on the so-called amateurs, a term that acquired a derisory connotation for those lecturers the professionals regarded as merely capable of reading the reading. While their criticism might well have been based on instances of glaringly clumsy performances, on the whole, however, their strident tone and the generalities that often passed for evidence feed the suspicion that the contrast was overstated and the controversy they created was to a significant extent discursive. Actually, the overstatement was in the very juxtaposition of professionals and amateurs, because what it conveniently omitted was the category of local lecturers who wrote their own texts to their own illustrations for their own irregular, even one-off public lectures. While such lecturers' enterprise and proficiency may well have put them on a par with professionals, their day jobs, as well as the local aspect of their performances, rather suggest an avocational mode of operation. Lantern culture nonetheless thrived on such enthusiasts, another contemporary denigrating term, by the way, while many local institutes relied on them for their public activities and for creating the very knowledge they transmitted. In France, furthermore, teachers, of course accustomed to speak before an audience, were also massively engaged to give illustrated lectures. As well, university extensions and similar academic outreach activities created a market for academic staff. In fact, it has been argued that the academe introduced a notable innovation in the educational lecture, namely the integration or simultaneity of speech and visuals. Unsurprisingly, the companies that published the Lantern readings used the term amateurs more appreciatively. Apparently mindful of the criticisms, they prepared their new and important type of customer a little with printed so-called preliminary hints, to study the reading before rendering it in public, inspect the order and state of the slides to be projected, or by reading up on the topic of the talk. Furthermore, educational lectures in particular contain scripted instances of ritual work here and there, phrases or terms of address that modulated their commonly impersonal mode, plausibly to establish a measure of rapport with an audience. Self-references are one example. Another are instances when speakers linguistically join the audience, what in French is called a discours enveloppant. These are often marked by the first person plurals we or us. A subset of this category addressed an audience in an appreciative way, as in surely you will know, and similar phrases. And another subset was mock dialogue, as a way to engage more fully with an audience. Thirdly, there are instances of a speaker stepping back momentarily in favor of known or unknown others by quotation, reference, or by well-known sayings, maxims, or anecdotes. Fourthly, hedges, or the ways that speakers distance themselves from a statement, as in perhaps, I guess, etc. While hedges too may have functioned to bring speaker and audience closer, they occur very sparsely, possibly because a speaker was expected to have considered a text well before appearing on the platform. In fact, this point suggests the possibility that these somewhat puzzlingly anomalous and isolated variations in the way an audience was addressed were perhaps not so much purposefully inserted, but were remnants of their author's text. Written by named or unnamed subject experts, I would posit that whenever lantern readings were too stylish, too elaborate, or even too personal, they may have made inexperienced lecturers uncomfortable to adopt them for their own purposes. The shape of these readings may therefore have been the outcome of cautious, balanced editorial decisions by publishers to put the product at the command of as many new customers as possible. In this perspective, the pre-printed lantern reading becomes an open-ended type of text. I would suggest that, borrowing a term from improvisational theatre, they constituted a setting for their performance to further develop and elaborate. In other words, the lantern reading marked a moment, a phase, in a would-be lecturer's career. The above-mentioned controversy created by the professionals, therefore, was not only misleading, but also misdirected, as the so-called amateurs, forced to do self-initiated ritual work, might eventually have gone on to join the professional ranks, leaving the lantern readings to a new batch of beginners to break into the business.